Hello creative photographers, I'm Hayley from Creative Photo Folk, the one-stop shop for all things creative photography. In today's video I'm going to show you a technique that I've seen have lots of spurts of popularity over the years. Screw City. To create your screw city, you'll need to raid your toolbox or stationery drawer for screws, nuts, bolts or staples, and then carefully position these to resemble a city skyline. When choosing your items, make sure they're going to sit flat when standing up, and you may wish to wind some nuts onto your bolts to give some character to your screws. I chose to shoot in my garage so I could turn off the lights if needed, and then set up a table for my screws and a black backdrop on a stand about 30 centimeters behind my setup to prevent spill from my lights. You could also just use a piece of black card as a backdrop, but I was worried it might fall forward and knock over my screws. For best results, it's recommended to set up your screw city on a reflective surface to make it look like the city is reflected in a body of water, just like my city, Brisbane, Australia, and maybe your city too. For this, you could use black plexiglass or pop a piece of black card under some glass from out of a picture frame, just like I did. Set your city up with a bit of a staggered look. It may be worth researching some pictures of city skylines for ideas of how to arrange your screws. Aim for as much variety as you can with different heights and widths, and make sure to work from one side to the other as you set it up. Otherwise, you're likely to cause an earthquake and knock the whole city over. I knocked mine over 3 or 4 times and found the staples were actually the most troublesome. If you feel the urge to experiment, you can then play around with your arrangements. I experimented with different shapes, different amounts of screws, different distances between the screws, and also how many rows of screws I arranged. To shoot, I put my camera on a tripod using a 24-70 lens so that it was wide enough to fit the scene and close enough to capture the reflection. I positioned this level with my city as close as I could get. I also then swapped to my 70-200 and shot from further back for a bit of variety. You may wish to light your scene, and you have a few options for how to do this. As your city is made of reflective surfaces, it's best to light from the sides to stop flaring. You could position lights either side at roughly 45 degrees in the standard lighting pattern. In my case, I had a speed light on the right and the ring light I was using to shoot this video on the left, just to fill in the shadows. You could also use a reflector for that purpose. For this, my settings were f16 for good depth, 3.2 seconds for enough light, and an ISO of 100. My flash was set to ETTL, but I manually dialed down the exposure. You could also try using a long exposure and then painting in some light from overhead with a torch. My settings were the same for this, except I used a shorter shutter of 1.3 seconds because the torch light was quite bright. If you don't have these options, you can simply use natural light and a long exposure. For this, I used a shutter of 15 seconds with a sliver of light coming through the door to my garage, and I actually might like these best. After trying each of these setups, I then added an orange gel to my speed light to create a sunset style mood. I then swapped that out for a blue gel to create a nighttime scene. To contrast with the blue, I held a yellow gel over my torch and switched that on and off quickly to add a touch of yellow as if the buildings were lit up. You can also try changing the background. Most people shoot against a black background and edit in a different sky, so I'll show you how to do that shortly. But if you'd rather get it right in camera, you can try printing out a photo of clouds to place behind your scene. My printer isn't very good, so my image had banding, but this may work for you. Now, let's head on over to post and have a little play. So now let's take a look at some of the ways you can edit your screw city. So for the first example, I'm going to use this image here, which I made to kind of look like it was night, but the buildings maybe have a little bit of light reflecting on them. And so I just did a little bit of work in Lightroom prior. All I've done really is bring up the exposure, drop the blacks, and then brought these guys up a little bit. So I'll just show you before and after. So really, I'm just adding a little bit more detail into them. And when I open that in Photoshop, I will go to Photo, Edit in, and then Edit in Adobe Photoshop. So here we have it. Now, the first thing I am going to do is add in the moon. So I have a picture of the moon right here. And I'm going to use my Move tool, which is the shortcut V. It's just this top one in the toolbar. And grab this photo, drag it up to the image I was working on, which is here, and drop it down. So we have a problem. It is coming in over the city, but I can change the blend mode and we will change it to screen. And look at that. We've got the moon in. Beautiful. In reality, the light is coming from the front, so it probably would not be positioned here, but we are not really dealing with reality. The next thing I will do is bring in some stars. So I have an image of stars that I took one night, and I will drag that up onto this composition. Now we will have some of that reflecting in the water, so I will just drag it over the full image. And again, I will change the blend mode to kind of like linear dodge. But the problem is it has come in over the city, and that truly is a problem. So what I might do is just add a levels. So from my little adjustment layer icon, I will go up to levels. I'm going to clip that, so I will press Alt or Option and then click between those two layers so that that levels is now only affecting my sky layer. And then I can drag in the darks to see what the others do, but it's still coming over the buildings. And there's really no way around that. What we could do is add a layer mask to our star layer. Use B, so B is your brush tool, and I could just paint that away from most places. You will lose it between the buildings, but you know what? In reality, you probably wouldn't see it around a lit city anyway because the light would be too bright for the stars. So that is one thing you could do. I would totally buy that, would you? And while we're here, I'm just going to get rid of this little line where the light was reflecting on the glass. So back to my original layer. I'm just going to add a new layer above it with my new layer icon. With my brush tool, I'm just going to sample. So I'm holding down Alt or Option to turn it from a brush to an eyedropper. And I'm going to sample a little bit of the sky and then make that much smaller and just paint that away. Though that color doesn't look right. Let's try a bit closer to home. There we go. The other thing we have a problem with is that the moon has no reflection. So we would need to also create that. So again, we would make a copy with Control or Command J, edit, transform, flip vertical. Using the Move tool with V, I would hold down Shift and drag that into position. And then to make that look realistic, we probably want to blur it up. So I'm going to teach you some techniques for that shortly, but just quickly, I will go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and kind of make it around that, I think. And I might even just bring down the opacity a touch. That way it kind of looks like a reflection, not this weird white blob in the middle of nowhere. And then you'll see shortly that we are going to use some effects to make it look like water. So you can apply that to this as well. And there we have a screw city at night. So that's one thing you can do. Now, another thing you might like to do is add in a different background, but I'm going to warn you, this is not for the faint of heart. So I've got this image here. I have experimented with lots of different ways to try and select the screws, and I'm having a real difficulty. The closest I've got is with Select and then Subject. And this is a pretty good job. It will need some cleaning up though. So ideally this area here, in here, we've got some blacks in here. So it could take a little while. And the tool I would recommend to do that is your Object Selection tool, fourth down on the toolbar. And what you would do is hold down Alt when you want to draw around bits that you do not want in the selection. So for example, that. So I'm holding down Alt or Option to get rid of things. And then to add things back in, for example, over here, I would hold down Shift to tell Photoshop that you would like that bit to be added to the selection. And this is what I would do. So I would spend quite a lot of time just refining the selection. And quite frankly, life's too short. So I'm not going to do this for you, but I will show you what I would do had this worked beautifully, which it might for you if you had lit it a little bit differently. So I have brought in a sky, which is this one here. And using my Move tool with V, I'm going to drag it, or you could just copy paste, up and down onto this composition. Before we go any further, I am just going to highlight my screw layer, add a layer mask just so we have sorted that out. Now with my sky selected, I will drag that into place. So it's a little too small. A couple of things I'm going to do is make it bigger. So Control or Command T to resize it so it fits the whole composition. I'm going to drag it behind the screw so we can see what it's looking like. Pretty good, but we have to get rid of this bottom part here. So I'm just going to use a rectangular marquee, second on your toolbar, and drag that out around here and add a layer mask. And it's coming upside down. So we'll hit Control or Command I to invert it, and now we have it where we want it. But obviously there's a problem because we don't have any on the bottom. So I'm going to make a duplicate of that layer with Control or Command J. Then I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Flip Vertical, move back to my Move tool with V, and then I can drag that little sky into position so it matches the other one. And that's how you would create your sky. But as I said, we've got some issues because of the selection tool. We've got a little bit of a weird bar here, so I'm just going to swap to my B tool when painting with black to get rid of whatever that is. And so that is how you would put in a sky if you wanted to, but obviously you're going to have to spend a lot of time on that masking. Another thing we could do. Now, let's say you weren't able to shoot on a reflective surface. You would do exactly what we just did with the sky. You would select that part of the image. So let's use rectangular marquee to draw around it. Then I'm going to press Control or Command J to pop just that bit of that layer onto its own new layer. Then I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Flip Vertical once again. And with my Move tool, so V, I would drag that into position. Now, good chance it probably won't line up exactly, but if you weren't able to shoot on a reflective surface, that is what you will have to do. So it's not perfect. It wasn't exactly straight by the looks of things, but you get the idea. What else can we do? Now, you can also affect how the water, in quotation marks, looks. So I was looking at pictures of my city and I noticed that the water wasn't so much ripply as it was streaky. So what I did is similar to what we just did. I made a selection. So in this case, we might select the bottom. So there we go. So again, just using that rectangular marquee tool. And then I'm going to press Control or Command J once again to pop that on its own layer. And then what I did is went to Filter, Blur, and then Motion Blur. And that's pretty much what I did. I made sure it was going from side to side, and then I just played with the distance to get a little bit of blur that I liked. So just a subtle one, hit OK. And then you have a nice kind of watery blur. But let's say we did want to do ripples. So let me just undo that step so we can work with it again. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to be playing with some filters, and filters are destructive. So to fix that, we can make our layer a smart object. So we will right click it and then go to Convert to Smart Object. And now anything we do to it will be editable. So first thing we'll do is go to Filter, Distort. Now there's a few options in here you can play with. I have played with a few of them and I only really liked Ripple. So we'll go with that one. And funnily enough, as the name suggests, it will do what we want. Now I just had to zoom out here because I could not see my composition. So I've zoomed out and then I can zoom back into where the area we're working on is. And so what I have chosen here is large, and I've set my amount to -265. And I think that has given me a result I'm relatively happy with. So I will hit OK, and you'll see what that does. So it's made it a little bit ripply, but by itself, I'm still not in love with it. So what I'm going to do is what we did before and go to Filter, Blur, and then Motion Blur. Now, this time, rather than going across like we did before, I'm actually going to move it down so it's at 90 degrees. And I'm going to play with the distance. I think I like this result better. I think it's nicer to have a blur this way. So we're going to bring it down just so I can still see a little bit of that ripple. So maybe around here is quite nice. I'm pretty happy with that. And so that is how I made some ripples. But as I said, if you want to do the more advanced method, pop into my course Exposing Illusions to learn how. And so this is more what you would create with that course. And so it does look a little bit more realistic, but I don't know, for the sake of this tutorial, it's really just some screws. So I probably wouldn't go to the effort for some screws, if you know what I'm saying. Anyway, hopefully you have some fun playing around in post.
Hope you've enjoyed this one. If so, please help me out with a like and subscribe, as I have plenty more fun videos to come. See you next time, and happy creating!